We're out at Lake Tapps today and looking at some changes in the flood mapping. So Lake Tapps is a floodplain. It gets wet. And so we've had FEMA maps that showed this floodplain going back to the 1970s. They did the original modeling in the 1970s. Some of the cities received that first map in the 1980s. Unincorporated Pierce County received that map in 1987. The map was made using the best available data we had at the time in the 1970s. We didn't have very many of the roads platted. Most of the homes weren't built yet at that time. And so this FEMA map that was drawn was kind of a crude representation of where Lake Tapps was. Once we built the homes and people started getting requests for having flood insurance, we realized that this map wasn't drawn as precise as it could have been. Lake Tapps was built as a man-made reservoir. The land is subdivided to be above the floodplain. And yet, because of inaccuracies with how we drew the map, we still end up capturing a number of people in a floodplain that really didn't deserve to be shown at that high risk of flooding. There are some low places around Lake Tapps that have risk, but quite a few of the homes were 10, 12 feet above the floodplain but are still showing up as a flood map. Okay. If you're in that high risk of flooding designation, you may be paying $2,000 to $3,000 a year in flood insurance. So having the new maps that are coming along, we have better topography, we have a better representation of Lake Tapps, and we're showing pretty much every single home along the Lake Tapps now out of the floodplain. So that's going to relieve a huge burden off of people for the flood insurance. It also has a regulatory relief that if somebody was to build a brand new home, they don't have to go and do that additional work to get the map changed and have elevation certificates and other instruments that cost you money. The analysis that we've done so far is that where we've had structures built, we have about over 1,500 homes that are coming out of the map floodplain, out of the mapped high hazard floodplain, and we have over 800 that are being mapped into that high hazard. So about 2-to-1 ratio of coming out versus going in. Now, an old abandoned channel from Clover Creek near Parkland that we didn't recognize as being an old historic creek channel. And so with new topography and new mapping, we recognize this, and so we have about 20 homes that are going into the floodplain based on that risk. Although historically we've had calls in that neighborhood from flooding, we just didn't always understand the source of the flooding. So now we have a better idea of where that flooding came from. So we have a brand new coastal study of Puget Sound recognizing high tides, high wave action, high wind action, and what that can do on the shoreline. And we've never had a detailed study of Puget Sound in the past. So we do have a number of properties that were built low right on the banks of Puget Sound that are being shown in a flood hazard for the first time. That anytime we can capture somebody at the beginning of a dream, they're not unhappy. And so if somebody comes in, sees a property, they don't understand everything that goes on, they start dreaming and designing and putting something in place, and then they come and they find out after they've spent an awful lot of capital, emotional capital. It's a really sad conversation sometimes. But if somebody starts that conversation early and says, hey, here's the limitations, here's the risk, it's a whole lot easier to have that conversation, move that dream to a little higher ground, put them in a safe spot, and then they can carry on and have the comfort of knowing that their house is going to be there for a long time and they're not going to have a reoccurring costs of thousands of dollars a year, and those flood insurance premiums are just continuing to go up all the time. Every single year, FEMA's raising those rates upwards of 25% a year. So you don't want to be in that map floodplain and pay those high premiums. Right. So if we can get somebody out of the floodplain, handle that dream early, we have a really good story to tell.